Hi folks, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and this channel is all about, well, running great one-shot adventures and also short campaigns. And while I enjoy writing a lot of my own adventures, which you can download on my blog, I routinely take inspiration from many of the amazing tabletop adventures that are available today. The amount of resources for GMs today is just amazing versus when I first started in the hobby way back when in the early days of Red Box Dungeons and Dragons. And while modern GMs have a glut of great material to use, I find a lot of inspiration in older material, adventures and supplements that were designed closer to the origin of the hobby that we love. So sometimes when I'm looking for inspiration for a new adventure or just feeling a little nostalgic, I return to those old adventures to mine them for goodness. It's like tabletop archaeology. The RPG hobby has changed a lot since those early days, but there's a ton of great material from the 80s and 90s that I still find refreshing and useful for modern GMs. And so today I'm going to return to the dark ages of 1991 with a review of Ship of Horror, an early Ravenloft adventure built for advanced Dungeons and Dragons. This adventure is set on a haunted sea and throws the players on a seafaring adventure filled with pirates, magic, and old horror, which, if you've watched this channel before, know that those are some of my favorite things. In Ship of Horror, the PCs board a seemingly innocent merchant vessel, but soon they discover that the ship and its mysterious captain are cursed. Ghosts haunt its hull, and they are heading for a dangerous island that lives in the center of a necromancer's domain. Sounds interesting, doesn't it? But does Ship of Horror still hold up over 30 years after it was written? Is it useful to brush off and use today? Well, man the crow's nest, grab your cutlasses and holy symbols, and prepare for some serious spoilers, because not only are you going to get a full review of Ship of Horror, I'm going to give you GMs some tips and tricks on how to run this adventure like a pro. Ship of Horror is written by Anne Brown. It's a lengthy 64-page adventure, and while a lot of that is detailed location descriptions that you probably won't use that much, it'll still likely take you a few sessions to complete. Ship of Horror is a surprisingly high-level adventure, especially considering it's only second in the official Ravenloft line, and it's designed for characters level 8 through 10. Ship of Horror was published in early 1991, which was a really interesting era for Dungeons & Dragons. D&D had seen huge success with the release of its Forgotten Realms campaign setting a few years prior, and TSR was now doubling down on settings. And while the D&D mechanics fit pretty snugly with worlds like Greyhawk or the Forgotten Realms, TSR was getting bolder and moving into settings and genres that were more bespoke. And horror had solidified itself as a very popular RPG genre, probably second to fantasy. Call of Cthulhu, although 10 years old at the time, was thriving. You couldn't go to a convention and not see dozens of Call of Cthulhu games. Palladium and GURPS had just come out with their horror supplements, and Vampire the Masquerade was just about to explode and take over the hobby. So Ravenloft was TSR's attempt at capturing the fantasy horror genre. And to reflect all the different types of horror that players might expect, Ravenloft was very cleverly composed of various domains of dread, subworlds that were divided by an otherworldly, often impenetrable mist. Some of these domains were gothic and felt like they were ripped out of a Hammer horror movie. Some featured things like Egyptian horror, and some were even more weird and unusual, like there was one that was a riff on the island of Dr. Moreau with like experimental monster horror. In Ravenloft, all horror could exist. But of course, AD&D was still very firmly entrenched in its fantasy wargaming roots, so Ravenloft authors and GMs had a real challenge to capture the chilling danger and fear that the horror genre demanded. After all, in a game where healing spells were everywhere, heroes had dozens and dozens of hit points, and many of the races could see in the dark, well, that's tough to ask GMs to make something really scary for your players, especially compared to games like Call of Cthulhu, where death and insanity were always just one encounter away. And so Ship of Horror came out during this time, and the author was clearly trying to channel nautical horror. Think things like skeletal pirates, ghost ships, the Flying Dutchman, that sort of thing. And so the adventure takes place entirely on a haunted sea and some of its islands. The setup of the adventure is this. The PCs board a vessel, the Endurance, sailed under a Captain Garvin. Personally, I insist that the crew call me Garvin. Now, why the PCs are on board this ship is really up to the GM. There's a few options the author gives you. Maybe this is a routine trip, or maybe if the players are already in Ravenloft, they receive information that this vessel promises a way to escape the plane, whatever. But I do recommend that you come up with a compelling reason for your players to board this ship. I played this one as a one-shot originally, and I said that the town that the players were in had come under a fierce attack by pirates. The whole place was burning down, and the players had to flee on the first ship that they could find, or else they'd be killed or enslaved by the pirates. That was a good motivation. What the PCs don't know is that Captain Garvin and his ship are cursed. You see, in his recent past, Garvin had accepted a mission to take some important dead bodies and bury them properly on Graben Island, which had better burial grounds for the noble families who wanted to take care of their deceased. But Garvin was a hurried and greedy man, and rather than doing this trip right, he just took the gold and dumped the bodies overboard. And this being Ravenloft, he was cursed for this vile action. Now, Captain Garvin is immortal, but he can never leave his ship. And if the ship is ever destroyed for any reason, it builds itself on the bottom of the ocean and reappears. So he will never leave the Endurance. Excuse me, I just have to point out that of all the vile things a pirate can do, is throwing some bodies overboard really worthy of a curse of eternal damnation? I mean, seriously, have you seen what Blackbeard did? This is really unfair. And his crew is similarly cursed. They're unable to leave the ship for very long lest they go mad. They can't even talk about the curse or else they have horrible nightmares. Unlike Captain Garvin though, the crew is still very much mortal, so if the ship sinks, they'll drown and the captain has to go find himself a new crew. So the poor captain has to sail around, bound to his ship, which is haunted by the ghosts of the bodies that he threw overboard. And although Captain Garvin is sort of a chill, mellow guy, he's slowly going out of his mind from this fate. I like this backstory. Dumping dead bodies overboard is a classic greedy pirate play, and the fact that Captain Garvin got cursed for this just makes this whole setting feel very dark and unforgiving. So the PCs, having walked aboard this vessel, are now cursed along with the captain and bound to the Endurance for as long as they live. But it'll take them a little while to figure this out since the crew doesn't really talk about it. The vessel is bound for, well, wherever the GM wants. I just make it a typical mission that a merchant ship might make. Garvin tells the PCs that maybe he's en route to a small island to pick up some fine Ravenloft wine, or some such. And it takes about a week to get there, and he encourages them to make themselves useful aboard the ship. But over the duration of this trip, weird stuff begins to happen. The adventure provides lots of open-ended events for the GM to insert on the voyage. There's a horrible, almost supernatural storm, strange accidents befall the crew, and even an attack by a giant starfish. Ha ha! There be no such thing as a giant starfish! Ha ha ha! And there's a really cool encounter, one of my favorites, where the Endurance comes under attack by another ship that's crewed by dozens of guests. I like to add a little backstory here that this ship was once captained by a competitor to Garvin's, and he betrayed that captain and its crew to a local governor, and the crew was all hanged for piracy and it was unjust. And now in Undeath, they are seeking out Captain Garvin and the Endurance to get their revenge. This sort of backstory really helps to add color to this Ravenloft domain. And at some point during this journey, the PCs will even notice that the ship begins to transform from a typical merchant ship into something that is rotting and tattered. Think the Black Pearl from Pirates of the Caribbean. And its name changes from the Endurance to the eponymous Ship of Horror. Ship of Horror, that name is a little on the nose, I don't love it. I guess along with hope and optimism, subtlety doesn't exist in Ravenloft either. I renamed the ship to the Wraithfetter in my version. But I do like the atmosphere that the adventure creates here, with the ship transforming, the weird events, and the uncaring but not outright villainous captain just observing it all, like very lackadaisically. But the weirdness and horror amp up at night when the PCs are visited by ghosts. There's a few of them on the ship too, ranging from a man named Jacob who keeps knocking on the cabin doors at night, a sad little girl who wakes the PCs and takes them to her room in the cargo area to look for her lost doll. And of course in the morning there's no sign of the little girl in her room, it's just a little empty spot in the cargo hold. There's also a very demanding woman named Madeline who wanders the ship. These ghosts all have very different personalities, which make them really fun to roleplay. And by interacting with them, the PCs will figure out that they are cursed and why that curse exists in the first place, because these ghosts were the bodies that the captain threw overboard. The whole first part of this adventure almost plays out like a Call of Cthulhu adventure, with investigation, role-playing, and these bursts of horrific action spooking the players. It's really fun. Being unable to leave a haunted ship is a big problem for most players, and so they'll be highly motivated to figure out a way to get rid of this curse. The only way, it turns out, is to recover the body of those 3 ghosts and bury them in their proper plots on Graben Island. And after convincing the captain to help, they can follow his logs to each corpse. As you can imagine, there's not much left to these remains. They've been sitting on the bottom of the ocean for a while, so they're mostly just skeletons at this point. The PCs are going to need, however, water-breathing gear or magic to help recover them. The adventure suggests that if your cleric or druid player couldn't make the table that night, to put some potions of water breathing inside the lockers of the ship. I thought this was a little ham-handed, and I preferred to make this less convenient, and I had one of the sailors on the ship possess an old grimoire. He was trying to research a way to get out of the curse himself, and if the players befriend him and figure this out, they can discover a ritual in that grimoire to cast a water-breathing spell, but at some cost. Like I said, healing wasn't going to work on that ship for at least 48 hours after the ritual was cast. You always want to give a cost to magic in a horror setting. Each of the bodies is underwater and defended by some various underwater bad guys, like skeletal sharks and aquatic umber hulks. Like, who knew those were a thing? I like that this adventure has these underwater sequences. They were always some parts of Pirates of the Caribbean that I thought were really cool, but I do wish that there was more variety here. Diving underwater 3 times in a row, fighting some underwater monster, and then escaping, well, it just gets old after a while. When I ran this, I made some tweaks here. I put one of the bodies on a sandbar that the players could row to, and another one actually on the inside of that giant starfish. Like, are ye still believing in a giant starfish? Ha ha ha! It had eaten the corpse, and it forced the PCs to fight with the entire crew with the ballistas and ropes to kill the starfish and recover the remains. This adds some variety into the adventure's encounters. With the bodies recovered, the PCs can now head to Graben Island to bury them. This feels like the end to a pretty spooky, fun adventure, right? No, but it's not. It's not at all. You're not even halfway through this adventure. Graben Island, you see, is ruled by the Graben family, a family of noble undead, a new form of undead never seen before in Dungeons & Dragons, the Lebentod undead. While their normal forms are these like hideous zombie-like things, they have powerful magic that lets them disguise themselves as ordinary nobles. And like humans, the Lebentod undead can even raise families and have normal social lives. They typically serve necromancers and are obviously pretty good at infiltrating human societies. And the Lebentods are very dangerous as individual creatures. They have up to 10 hit dice, they attack multiple times, they have magic, they're immune to a lot of forms of magic. Oh, and they can detach their limbs to perform various tasks. They're weird and they're kind of cool. Well, the Lebentods of Graben Island are all working for a necromancer named Meredoth. He lives in a mausoleum on another island, and he's ordered his servants to routinely send him dead bodies for his experiments. So in a fabulous twist, just as the PCs finally put the bodies of these ghosts to rest and are relieved thinking that the curse is all behind them, They'll soon realize that these bodies are going to be dug up again and shipped off to a distant island to be fodder for some crazy necromancer. So part 2 of this adventure is all about exploring Graben Island and discovering what's going on here. This is sort of a sandbox part of the adventure, with the island having 2 large villages, the graveyard, which is obviously being ransacked. The Graben family doesn't even try to cover up that that's what they're doing, is robbing bodies from it, and the Graben estate and its family of those noble undead. The villagers of Graben Island don't really suspect that the family that rules the place are undead lords, but within a few days of staying at the island, the PCs will notice that people on the island are routinely getting murdered or captured and then turning up dead and then buried in the graveyard, and their bodies are disappearing. So they'll put 2 and 2 together really quick and figure out that somebody's robbing the graveyard. Now, I do think that this section of the adventure is weaker than the first. While part 1 was very tightly arranged with lots of spooky events and ghosts and good NPCs, Graben Island is just kind of sketched out. The adventure sort of just assumes that the players will want to stick around and realize that the bodies are getting dug up, figure out that the Grabens are actually horrifying limb-detaching undead monsters, and then lead a full-scale assault on the Graben estate to take them all out, where they'll then find evidence of this greater evil, the necromancer Meredoth, and decide they want to go kill him. That's a lot to ask the PCs who just stepped off of a haunted boat. The adventure can really come to a kind of a weird halt here if you're not careful. My recommendation is to just continue the theme of the curse. Let the players bury the bodies and lift the curse, but then a day or 2 later, the Grabens sneak out, dig up those bodies, and the curse returns. The ghosts were not really put to rest. And this happens even if the players were smart enough to cast ceremony or gentle repose to prevent something unnatural from happening to those bodies. Maybe the graveyard's soil is just too corrupted by the Lebentads for that to actually work. So the curse now returns in full force, and perhaps some of those ghosts do too. And then they're furious about how their final rest has been violated by these horrible nobles, the Graben family. And now Captain Garvin is also furious, and he can be an instigator for making amends here because his escape from the curse has been foiled. This will all better motivate the players much more than what the adventure suggests. With the Lebentads of Graben Island destroyed, the PCs find journals in the estate that uncover that the necromancer Meredoth is bad news and probably should be stopped. Now again, the adventure is light on motivation here because other than the fact that Meredoth's the lord of this evil domain in Ravenloft, which is oddly named Neblingtoad, his agenda isn't really clear. Yes, he's evil and he's collecting dead bodies for God knows what, but it's not really stated what his purpose actually is. So GMs, you need to craft your own evil plot here to make the PCs care to confront Meredoth.
Since when do necromancers have to explain their plans? In the old versions of Dungeons and Dragons, we never had to.
I have 2 recommendations. First, if you're running this as a one-shot or an interlude in a longer campaign, Meredoth can allude in letters to the Graben family that he has figured out ways to get out of Ravenloft. After all, the domain of Neblingtoad is ocean-based, and so perhaps he discovered magic which lets boats sail in and out of the domain of dread. And an escape route will motivate your players to go give him a visit. Second, you can leverage the Lebentads and say that Meredoth is obsessed with creating more of these living vampires, and he's planning to use them to infiltrate high societies all across the land, perhaps even sending them back to the player's homeland. Now, creating these Lebentad is a very difficult, painstaking process, even for a powerful necromancer, and he's only succeeded a few times, thus the Graben family. But if the PCs don't stop him, Meredoth will have sleeper agents everywhere in this world. Either way, once you add some reason for the PCs to take interest in Meredoth, they're off to his rocky island of Todstein to stop him. Todstein is a very small island, and it's a frigid Arctic island. The place is covered in pine forests, snow, and freezing conditions. And at its center is Meredoth's frozen mausoleum. And so the conclusion of this adventure is essentially a small dungeon, which is composed of about a dozen rooms. There's a few simple traps in here, mostly ice-themed, things like deadfalls or slippery slides. There's lots of skeletons. There's, I think, almost 200 of them here. And there's also a few snow golems, which those are kind of cool. As far as dungeons go, this one's pretty basic. There's nothing especially clever or cool here, but it's short and sweet. At the end of the dungeon is Meredoth and his laboratory. Now, this is the place where very likely the PCs will all meet a bloody horrible end because Meredoth is a 20th level necromancer. And not only is he loaded with magic weapons, a ring of shooting stars, a rod of smiting, a broom of flying, and I can't believe I'm gonna say this, snowshoes of many tracks.
How dare you mock my magic snowshoes? How do you expect a necromancer to keep up with his ice golems when we take walks in the snow every day?
And of course, Meredoth knows dozens and dozens of nasty spells. He can teleport, he can throw fireballs, lightning, summon monsters, toss meteor swarms, and trap souls. By any old school role-playing standard, he is a beast, and a party of 8th level characters are probably all going to die a horrible death here, especially since the author makes a specific note that, being a lord of Ravenloft, Meredoth instantly knows that the PCs have stepped onto his island and he goes into like extermination mode. So if the GM plays him intelligently, which he really should, the murder of the party will be quick and merciless. So GMs, like what I'm saying here is you probably should tune Meredoth to give your players at least a fair shot of winning the day. But if the PCs manage to defeat Meredoth, he's destroyed and his domain collapses and fades into mist. That's the end of Nebligtoad. It leaves the players somewhere else. Maybe they're back home in their original land, or more likely they've been dumped somewhere else in Ravenloft with another set of problems, like mummies. And that's Ship of Horror. So what do I think? I'll just say this right away. I really, really like this adventure. Yes, it's clumsy in places, and yes, there are sections that the GM just needs to flesh out, but it absolutely accomplishes what it set out to achieve, immersing players in a spooky nautical horror adventure. And that's despite the AD&D rules, which were not designed to do that at all. The first part of this adventure is wonderful and spooky and requires players to use their brains, not their abilities, to figure out why they are cursed and how to escape it. It's such a strong start to this adventure and it feels very different from a lot of the D&D modules from this era. And then it has that wonderful twist. Just when your players think the adventure is over and they've won the day, it flips everything on its head and you realize that the bodies you were delivering were about to head for a worse fate than being left at the bottom of the ocean. Like, in a way, Captain Graben did right by them. And the Lebentod undead in the whole middle part are weird and original too, with their like ability to rip off their limbs and the fact that they set themselves up like regular families. And the whole thing just has a very Gothic feel. When I ran this part, I leaned into that. I had the Graben family invite the players to dinner after they arrived. After all, they'd come a long way and the island doesn't get many visitors. And at dinner, the Graben seemed a little stiff and a little old-fashioned and a little weird, but not abnormally so. And then one of the players snuck away from the table just to investigate the estate a little bit more and saw one of the Grabens like detaching her arm to reach something that she had dropped under a chair. And then the horror that the entire family here were undead monsters really sunk in, and the players had to like fight their way out and flee for their lives to the docks. And while I wish that the dungeon at the end of the adventure on Todstein Island was more creative, I like that it's themed around something that no player is going to expect. The fact that the players in the middle of a pirate adventure find themselves on a frozen Arctic island fighting snow golems, that's like really different and cool. It's unexpected. And while he's definitely way too powerful and needs more personality and motivation attached, I like that the villain at the end of this adventure, Meredoth, is truly scary and is connected to most everything that has come before. Defeating him is definitely going to require much more than a full frontal assault, which is great for horror. I only have two real problems with this adventure. I dislike that it was designed for such high-level characters. Horror works best when characters are fragile and easily outmatched, and 8th to 10th level characters are just far too strong to really be afraid of many of the encounters in this adventure. They just have too many hit points, too many magical abilities, and probably magic items to worry. I would have made the adventure for starting characters like levels 1 or 2 and have them be discovering Ravenloft for the first time. Second, the NPCs really do need to be fleshed out a little bit more with better motivations for this adventure to shine. I've already talked about how Meredoth needs a better motivation, but Captain Graben and his crew need work too. Garvin's a cursed man, and you should tweak him accordingly. I like to make him callous, but unswervingly loyal to his crew. He intentionally runs with a smaller crew than he needs because he knows that whoever boards his vessel is cursed along with him. He frequently takes on the most dangerous and immoral missions, not because he's a villain, but because he feels responsible to the crew to pay them really well. And while the adventure says that the captain does think that his curse can be lifted by recovering those bodies, I like to say that he doesn't know that at all, that he's just given up hope of lifting the curse. He's just accepted his fate, that he's doomed and to roam the seas forever. But the PCs, by interacting with the crew and the ghosts, can piece together that this man can in fact be redeemed. And then I flesh out the crew more. The players are sailing on a boat for many, many days, so insert some crew members who have their own secrets, or maybe they just hate the PCs because they're taking a share of the profits. The more you make the crew feel alive, the more fun this adventure gets. But even with those issues, Ship of Horror is a wonderful horror adventure, and I'm impressed that Anne Brown crafted such a robust, chilling adventure that still holds up over 30 years later. A few weeks ago, I decided to run a Pirate Borg game at a local game convention. Pirate Borg is this amazing OSR, D&D-like game that really leans into piracy. And I used Ship of Horror as my inspiration. I ended up changing quite a bit of it to fit a 4-hour convention slot and also to fix some of those issues that I had with it. I moved the setting out of Ravenloft to the Caribbean. I retooled the whole thing for first and second level characters. I added motivations for key NPCs, and I compressed the last half of the adventure so it could easily be fit into one session. This means I combined Graben Island and Todstein Island into one island. I cut out some of the extraneous encounters, sorry battle with the starfish, and I also placed the ghosts' corpses on a single haunted reef versus spread out all across the ocean. If you're interested in checking out my reboot of Ship of Horror, which I titled Crown of Fetters, check out my website at oneshotadventures.com, where you can download it for free for both Pirate Borg and also GURPS. I think that you'll find the end product is actually very different from Ship of Horror. It's really become its own adventure, but its dark heart is still the same. Oh, and for you 5e players, go ahead and check out Igor Kamenali's Ship of Horror Gothic Conversion, which not only does a fantastic job of converting the adventure into 5e, but it also adjusts its encounters to make them more interesting, gives plenty of great GM advice, including ways to make the Leventods on Graben Island spookier, and even ways that the PCs can cause the villages on Graben Island to uprise against their undead lords. And it gives tips to GMs who want to run the entire Ravenloft Grand Conjunction campaign, which is a loosely connected series of 6 adventures, of which Ship of Horror is one of them. But seriously, this supplement is A+ work by a fan. And also worth mentioning is Christopher Lee, no, not that one, his encounter map pack for this adventure, which provides plenty of beautiful maps for all of its locations. I'll put links in the description below for both of these asset packs. I love it when my archaeology of old RPG supplements finds some gold and inspires me to create something of my own, and Ship of Horror is a treasure ship in this regard. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more old school reviews like it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. And if you've played Ship of Horror, I'd love to know what your experience was like. Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, I'm JC, and just remember, even if you're a lazy pirate scoundrel who wants to take shortcuts in life, always bury your dead. If you don't, you might just find yourself with a ghost problem.